Welcome to another episode of on the Catholic Novel. Today we're doing our second show on Edwin O'Connor's The Edge of Sadness. And I'm doing that because I just think it is such a great novel. I think we've done over 40 novels, and this is one of my favorites. It's really a great novel. In the first show, I tried to show how Edwin O'Connor uses humor. And I mentioned the character Charles Carmody, that he's a perfect example of discrepancy, where he presents himself one way when he is really another way. And every time that is shown, almost every time, it's funny. But there's one other character that O'Connor uses for humor. It's the young curate that the main character, Father Hugh Kennedy, has. He's Father Danowski. He's a very good young priest, but he's very simple, very, very sincere, and has a kind of an archaic way of speaking. So at one point in the novel, he's explaining to Father Kennedy how his classmates used to kid him and in a pleasant way, in a joking way, kind of make fun of him. And he tells them this, and he says, but they meant no harm. They meant no harm. And when I would try to say to them, now, why are you doing this? Is this really what you want to do? They would even laugh more. But it was all in good humor. It was all because they were trying to be humorous. So they meant well. And Father Kennedy says, Father Kennedy is the narrator of the novel. He says, the goodness of this priest just shone forth. And he put me to shame. So once again, he uses humor, and then all of a sudden hits you with this wonderful insight, okay? So this second session, I want to point out some of the profound insights. Ron Hansen has written an introduction to the copy of the novel that I have. And he says in the introduction that Jesuit priests he knows tell him that The Edge of Sadness was the first novel that they were allowed to read when they were novices. Their novice master let them read this. And Ron Hansen says, I wonder why they did that. It certainly wasn't because the novel would show them how to run bingo games, or it certainly wasn't because the novel would show them how to give a homily, or how they should celebrate the liturgy. Now, why did the novice master do that? I think it was because in this novel, we have an American version of all the themes that St. John of the Cross refers to in his writings. That is quite a statement, but I agree with it completely. When O'Connor tries to write seriously about our relationship with God, I find it dynamite. On another show, I mentioned that many years ago, a Catholic nun told me she felt she got more spiritual nourishment from Catholic novels than she got from so-called spiritual books. I was surprised at first, but actually, when I thought about it, it made sense. We can meet Christ anywhere. We can meet Christ where we're watching television. We can meet Christ where we're reading a newspaper. So we don't have to go to what people call a spiritual book. Now, I don't even like that expression. I mean, I know we got to call these books something. What I'm thinking of is like The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, St. Francis de Sales, A Guide to a Christian Life, the writings of St. John of the Cross, Eugene Boylan's This Tremendous Love. So there are such books. What I'm concerned about is when we say spiritual, we kind of carve out another part of reality. There is only one life that we're living. It has a spiritual dimension, of course, but I just don't like the term spiritual books or spiritual life. Maybe I'm all wrong on that, but when O'Connor turns his focus on what is central to our relationship with God, it's pretty terrific, I think. So I'm going to read a whole page from The Edge of Sadness, because I think it's as good as anything you're going to read in a book that people usually call a spiritual book. I read it just a few nights ago. I gave a lecture on this book to a Catholic novel adult education course, and I wasn't sure how it was going over, whether they were as excited as I was. But the next day, when I spoke to them, I think they all agreed this is really beautiful. So this is Father Hugh Kennedy, who is a recovering alcoholic in the novel, and he is the narrator of the novel. So he's talking here about prayer, and here's what he says. For when we do anything, however important, over and over again, when by repetition we reach the point where we could do this thing without thinking, The danger is that we will do it without thinking. The result is that sometimes we will pray to God, say, in the same automatic way that we'll tie our shoelaces. I mention prayer because it's so peculiarly liable to this sort of thing. We know our prayers so well and have said them so often that before we know it, we've said them again and again without a shred of thought or meaning. I suspect it's very hard for most of us to pray well, that is. The mechanical act of falling upon one's knees and saying the Lord's Prayer every day is one thing, and a simple thing. But to say even the first half dozen words of that prayer with the attention they deserve is quite another, and not at all so simple. I think every prayer well said is a shot through a barricade, and the barricade surrounds the altar as well as anywhere else. The priest saying Mass knows exactly what he is doing. He knows that the words he repeats day after day are the gravest words he will ever speak, that they are, in fact, the very core of his belief and of his being. Yet, in spite of this, there comes that moment when, with a sudden shock, he realizes that his mind has been wandering. For exactly how long, he does not know, and that the words of the divine sacrifice have been little more than a buzzing background blur, which is a strong signal to keep his guard up in the future. But because the dangers of routine are what they are, and more important, because we are what we are, this is easier said than done. And so sometimes, and unhappily, there are priests who unintentionally but carelessly begin to elide, to speed up, even to skip, until their hands the Mass becomes a lightning travesty of itself. And startled parishioners find that they're out of church almost as soon as they came in. I think that's pretty good, and I think probably all of us can catch ourselves. You think of the thousands of times we have said in Our Fathers. You think of the thousands of times we've said Hail Marys. This occurred to me a few weeks ago. I was saying a deck of the Rosary at a wake, and as I was saying it, it occurred to me that the deceased was somebody extremely important in the life of the people at that wake. She was a relative of some of them. She was a best friend of others. And I thought, who am I to be leading them in prayer? I wish I could perform some miracle of faith to make her present to them again alive. So what I'm saying is I think O'Connor has touched upon something really important. There is another section of the book. In this section, the main character is sort of confronting his parish. It's a kind of a parish that is on the skids. The bishop has said to him he's not going to transfer him. He's going to keep him at that parish. And the character, Father Kennedy, is always tempted to compare it to two other parishes he knew. And that he would fit in better there. He would be more successful with the parishioners. The parishioners were more his type of people and so on. And he's alone, okay? And then he gets this insight. And I think it's just terrific the way that O'Connor describes this, okay? So this is Father Kennedy, the narrator of the novel. So I was alone again. It was hardly the first time I'd been alone in this rectory. But now there was a difference. This was the first time I'd ever stood all alone in the silence of this old building, filled with little but the echoes of a past that was over before my own began, and looked around me and slowly realized at last that this was mine and would be mine, that was my home for the rest of my life. And with this, at first, I felt the touch of regret, an edge of sadness. I knew that as long as I lived in Old St. Paul's, that's where he is, it would never mean to me what St. Stephen's or St. Raymond's had meant, that these are the other parishes he's familiar with, that it could never grip my heart and affections in the same way. And then, out of nowhere, a single question came before me. Was it ever intended to take the place of those other parishes? It was a simple question, but one I'd never asked myself before. I had no direct answer, but possibly the question itself was enough. For slowly, another feeling came in, rising over regret, a feeling that swelled until it was almost, what? Joy. Maybe that's too strong a word at this point, But it grew and grew until I felt it so strongly that I could feel nothing else. An awareness, an assurance that while something was over forever, something else had just begun. And that if the new might not seem the equal of the old, that might be because the two were not to be compared. The new was something of another kind, something I had never known before. I stood, aching with excitement, and suddenly it seemed to me that something might be ahead that grew out of the past, yes, but was totally different, with its own labors and rewards, that it might be deeper and fuller and more meaningful than anything in the past, and that as a priest in Old St. Paul's working day by day in this parish, I had really been shamed into choosing, by the scornful words of a dying friend, that's a priest friend of his, I might, through the parish and its people, find my way not again to the simple engagement of the heart and affection, but to the richness, the mercy, the immeasurable love of God. I think that is great writing, and I find it very, very inspiring. And I'm hoping that all of us, from time to time, have some kind of experience like that. What is it an experience of? It's an experience of grace. It's an experience of the Holy Spirit. In spite of all the barriers we put up, in spite of all the distractions we engage in, somehow God breaks through. So this is, this is a really happy moment in this novel. And I just marvel that a layman can enter into the conscience and consciousness of a priest as deeply as Edwin O'Connor has. He must have been a very intelligent man, Edwin O'Connor. He died at the age of 40. Tremendous loss to the church in this country. How I wish I could have met him and discussed this novel with him. Where did he get these insights? Did he know a lot of priests? Did he ever want to be a priest? I have all kinds of questions. So this is the second and last lecture on The Edge of Sadness, and let me end this lecture the way I ended the first lecture. Try the novel. I don't think you will be disappointed.